The Zenith Orbital Institute hung in the void like a monument to academic pretension, its crystalline spires catching the light of three nearby stars in what the architects probably thought was an inspiring display of intellectual brilliance. In reality, it looked like someone had stuck a chandelier in space and called it a university. But then again, when you're the most prestigious institution of higher learning in a galaxy containing 47,000 sentient species, you get to be a little flashy about it. For the past 3,000 years, ZOI had been churning out the galaxy's elite, diplomats who could negotiate trade agreements without starting wars, scientists who could split atoms without splitting their colleagues' opinions, and engineers who designed ships that only occasionally exploded. The student body represented the cream of galactic civilization. Species who had evolved on worlds where the most dangerous predator was something that might give you a mildly uncomfortable rash if you weren't careful. There were the glimmering folks from Pacifica IX, whose home world's biggest threat was deciding which of 7 edible fruits to have for breakfast. The Vryn Collective hailed from a high-gravity moon where the atmosphere was so thick that falling from any height felt like landing on a cushion made of other, smaller cushions. Even the reptilian Kreshnar, who liked to brag about their warrior heritage, came from a planet where warfare meant strongly worded disagreements over territory that inevitably ended with both parties going home for dinner. Then humanity submitted their application for membership. The Galactic Assessment Board had spent 6 months analyzing Earth, and their report made for absolutely fascinating reading, assuming your definition of fascinating included phrases like apocalyptic weather events, megapredator ecosystem, and plate tectonics that actively try to murder the inhabitants. Earth scored a 9.8 out of 10 on the Presnell-Ryer Deathworld Index, losing 0.2 of a point solely because it didn't have acid rain. The board noted this seemed like an oversight on Earth's part. The planet featured weather systems that could flatten cities, oceans that could swallow islands, and a sun that would literally give you cancer if you stood under it too long. Humans had evolved alongside creatures that could crush them, eat them, poison them, or in particularly creative cases all three simultaneously. Their own bodies attacked them with something called allergies, where the immune system occasionally decided that peanuts were the enemy and tried to kill its host in response. Naturally, the admissions committee rejected humanity's application. Then humanity invented faster-than-light travel in 18 months, using what they described as spite and caffeine. And suddenly the committee discovered a newfound appreciation for human potential. Nothing opens doors quite like proving you don't actually need permission to walk through them. That was 5 years ago. Now, humans attended ZOI alongside everyone else, and the university had learned to keep medical teams on standby whenever they were present. Not because humans were violent, quite the opposite, actually. They were friendly, enthusiastic, and deeply committed to the universal ideals of peace and cooperation. The problem was that humans had absolutely no concept of their own terrifying nature. Professor Kilmathreen stood at the front of advanced quantum mechanics, all 7 of his eye stalks focused on the equations floating in holographic display before him. He was a centurion, a species known for their patience, wisdom, and complete inability to handle stress. His skin had started turning from its usual calm blue to an anxious purple-gray approximately 10 seconds after he'd seen a human name on his class roster. The classroom itself was a masterpiece of modern design, seats that adjusted to any body configuration, atmospheric controls that could accommodate everything from methane breathers to chlorine enthusiasts, and walls reinforced to withstand what the architects carefully termed energetic academic discussions. The human proofing had been added last semester after an incident involving a student who'd gotten excited about a breakthrough and accidentally put her hand through a wall while gesturing. Thexelor sat in the 3rd row, his crystalline body refracting light in what he considered an aesthetically superior manner to everyone around him. The Vryn were justifiably proud of their unique physiology, silicon-based life forms with body structures that resembled living gemstones. They were beautiful, durable, and had evolved on a world where the worst thing that could happen to you was falling into a mineral deposit and taking 3 or 4 hours to extract yourself. This particular Vryn came from the 5th Noble House, a bloodline that had produced senators, scientists, and at least one individual who'd written a very dry autobiography about administrative reform. Thexilor wore his privilege like his ancestors wore their awards, prominently and with the assumption that everyone should be impressed. His academic record sparkled almost as much as his physical form, top marks in theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, and condescending to perceived inferiors 101. He found humanity's presence at ZOI personally offensive. These creatures from their little Deathworld had simply bullied their way into galactic society through technological advancement, which Thexilor considered deeply unfair. His people had spent thousands of years refining their culture, developing sophisticated art forms, and perfecting the subtle art of looking down on others. Humans had shown up with duct tape, audacity, and working warp drives, then had the nerve to act like they belonged. The quantum field variations, Professor Kilmathreen was saying, 3 of his eye stalks now monitoring the door, demonstrate a peculiar relationship with gravitational constants that defies our previous understanding of the door opened. Every alien head turned. 43 students collectively held whatever they used for breath. Professor Kilmathreen's skin shifted decisively into stressed purple. The human walked in. To call her entrance casual would be like calling a supernova somewhat bright. She moved with the kind of unconscious grace that evolution gifted to apex predators, the ones who'd spent millions of years at the top of the food chain and had the confidence to prove it. Her legs covered distance with an efficiency that spoke of persistence hunting across open plains. Her arms swung with the loose readiness of a creature whose ancestors had thrown rocks hard enough to kill from a distance. But it was her face that really sold the nightmare. 2 forward-facing eyes, the universal marker of a predator, scanned the room with the kind of casual assessment that prey species recognized on an instinctual level. Her teeth, briefly visible when she smiled at a classmate, included prominent canines designed for tearing meat. The biological threat assessment subroutines that most species didn't even know they had started screaming warnings that roughly translated to "that thing hunts things like you." She wore what humans considered normal attire, some kind of synthetic weave pants, a shirt with incomprehensible writing on it, and footwear that could apparently transition from casual comfort to pursuit sprint without warning. Her hair was pulled back in a style that said, "I can't be bothered with this right now," which was somehow more terrifying than if she'd dressed for intimidation. "Sorry I'm late, Professor," she said, her voice carrying that slightly apologetic tone that humans used when they'd done something mildly inconvenient. "The transit pod thought I was cargo, and tried to route me to the storage bay again." This was actually a common problem. Human bone density and muscle mass made them substantially heavier than species of equivalent size, and automated systems kept trying to classify them as freight. The university had filed 47 complaints with the Transit Authority, who'd responded that perhaps humans could simply weigh less, which was not technically a solution. "Quite all right, Miss Carter," Professor Kilmathreen said, his voice slightly strangled. His eye stalks tracked her movement to an empty seat with the attention of someone watching a live explosive. "Please, sit wherever you'd like, preferably somewhere structurally reinforced." Zara Carter, she preferred Z. But the university database was formal, dropped into a seat in the second row with the kind of controlled movement that still somehow suggested violence. The chair, rated for 3 times the weight of the average student, groaned slightly. She pulled out her datapad and stylus, radiating the oblivious friendliness of someone who had no idea that half the class was mentally updating their wills. Thexilor watched this display with crystalline disdain. He'd been observing the human since the semester started, looking for any excuse to challenge her presence. The fact that she consistently scored at the top of every assessment only made it worse. It was offensive enough that humans had invaded civilized space, but for one to be actually intelligent added insult to injury. "As I was saying," the professor continued, voice wavering, "the quantum field variations present unique challenges to our understanding. Miss Carter, since you're just joining us, perhaps you could explain the core paradox we're examining." Z looked up from her notes, and Thexilor saw several students in her immediate vicinity subtly lean away. "Sure," she said, with that characteristic human enthusiasm that everyone else interpreted as bloodlust. We're looking at the disconnect between quantum behavior at the particle level and macro-scale gravitational effects, specifically why the math works in simulation but falls apart when we try to apply it to actual stellar phenomena. The prevailing theory suggests we're missing a mediating force, but nobody's been able to identify what that force might be or why it only becomes apparent at stellar scales. She delivered this explanation with the casual competence of someone discussing the weather, completely unaware that 3 students in the back row were seriously considering dropping the class just to avoid being in the same room as her. Precisely correct, Professor Kilmathreen said, 2 eye stalks now watching Thexilor, who had begun to glow slightly brighter, the Vrin equivalent of getting angry. The mathematical models suggest actually. Thexilor interrupted, his voice carrying the particular harmonics that Vren used when they wanted everyone to know they were smarter than you. I find it interesting that we're accepting answers from species who only discovered quantum mechanics a few centuries ago. My people were exploring these concepts when humans were still hitting rocks with other rocks. The classroom went silent. Even Professor Kilmathreen's eye stalk stopped moving. Z turned to look at Thexilor, her face arranged in an expression of polite interest that made everyone else press themselves deeper into their seats. That's actually really cool, she said, because humans genuinely thought academic heritage was interesting rather than recognizing a direct insult. What conclusions did your people reach about the mediating force problem? Thexilor's crystalline structure pulsed with irritation. She was supposed to be offended, not curious. We concluded that some species simply lack the cognitive sophistication to grasp certain concepts. Perhaps we should focus on topics more appropriate to the full range of intellectual capabilities present. Thexilor, Professor Kilmathreen said, his skin now achieving colors that probably didn't have names. That is entirely inappropriate. I'm just saying. Thexilor continued, warming to his theme, that standards have clearly declined if we're admitting students from planets where survival depends more on physical attributes than mental ones. Anyone can evolve muscles and aggression. Actual intelligence requires proper environmental pressure. A student in the front row, a glimmering folk named Yistin, who'd befriended Z during orientation, made a sound like wind chimes in a panic. Maybe we should take a break, they suggested hopefully. A long break. Perhaps a semester-long break. Z's expression hadn't changed, but something about her posture shifted in a way that species with proper threat assessment systems recognized as very, very bad. Are you saying, I don't belong here? She asked, her tone still friendly, still curious, which was somehow worse than if she'd gotten angry. I'm saying, Thexilor said, standing up to his full height, which was still several inches shorter than Z sitting down. But he apparently hadn't done that math, that your presence is a courtesy extended to a young species, not recognition of actual capability. You're a physical specimen, not an intellectual one. Thexilor, Professor Kilmathreen's voice cracked across all available frequencies. Sit down immediately. But Thexilor was on a roll now, his noble pride and prejudice combining into something remarkably stupid. In fact, I'd wager that in any objective measure of capability, the human would prove inferior. Her grades are probably inflated out of political courtesy. I doubt she could win a fair competition of any sort. Z stood up. The movement was fluid, controlled, and made approximately 15 students seriously consider the benefits of changing their major to something that didn't involve sharing space with humans. She was smiling, which was probably meant to be reassuring, but showed entirely too many teeth designed for purposes that didn't include eating salad. What kind of competition? She asked. No, Professor Kilmathreen said. No, absolutely not. Sit down, Miss Carter. Thexilor, you will apologize immediately, and a simple physical test, Thexilor said, his pride having apparently murdered his sense of self-preservation in cold blood. Nothing dangerous, arm wrestling. It's a test of strength that my physiology is well suited for. My crystalline structure can handle significant pressure without damage. Unless, of course, you're afraid of demonstrating your actual capabilities. The challenge hung in the air, like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Okay, Z said, with that distinctly human combination of friendliness and competitiveness that had led to both the Olympics and at least 3 wars. Sure, why not? No, Professor Kilmathreen said, all 7 eye stalks rigid with horror. Absolutely not, I forbid it. I am filing an emergency request with medical right now. Campus security is being notified. This is against at least 47 university regulations. But it was too late. Thexilor had moved to an empty desk, positioning himself with his arm extended. His crystalline structure gleamed with confidence, each facet reflecting light in what he undoubtedly thought was an impressive display of superior evolution. The other students were evacuating. Not running, exactly, that would be undignified, but moving toward the exits with what could charitably be called purposeful haste. Yis then paused at the door. Z, they chimed, maybe you shouldn't. It's fine, Z said, rolling her shoulders in a way that made her joints pop audibly. 3 remaining students decided that Yistin had the right idea and departed. I'll be gentle. Those 3 words hung in the air like a death sentence that didn't realize it was being merciful. She approached the desk, and Thexilor had roughly 2 seconds to reconsider his life choices before she sat down opposite him. Up close, the differences between them became even more apparent. His crystalline arm was beautiful, geometric, evolved for a world where physics was a suggestion and violence was theoretical. Her arm was a machine sculpted by millions of years of survival pressure, wrapped in skin that could seal wounds through sheer bloody-minded determination, over muscles that could sustain activity for hours, connected to bones that could take impacts that would shatter his entire species. Ready when you are, she said cheerfully. Thexilor placed his arm against hers and immediately realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Even at rest, her musculature felt like living stone. Her skin was warm humans, ran hotter than most species, a side effect of their overclocked metabolism, and beneath it, he could feel the subtle movement of tendons over bone that had been forged in the fires of Deathworld evolution. Too late to back out now. His pride wouldn't allow it. Also, 3 of his classmates had started recording. On 3, Professor Kilmathreen said weakly from behind his desk, where he'd taken cover. 1, 2, medical team, I need you on standby with crystalline reconstruction equipment. 3, Thexilor pushed with everything he had. His crystalline structure was optimized for this. Pressure dispersed through geometric matrices that distributed force across his entire lattice. He could handle several thousand pounds of pressure per square inch without breaking. He was going to prove that physical evolution was inferior to proper structural optimization. He was going to demonstrate that Z applied what she thought was gentle pressure. The sound was exactly like someone stepping on very expensive glass. Thexilor's arm didn't just break. That would have been too simple. The crystalline structure that had evolved to distribute force across multiple surfaces met an application of pressure it had absolutely no evolutionary context for. The geometric matrices that normally spread impact load encountered a focused, sustained force that simply did not stop. The fracture started at the point of contact, a hairline crack that appeared in the space between heartbeats, then physics, biology, and Thexilor's terrible decision-making skills combined to spectacular effect. The crack propagated along natural fault lines in his crystal matrix, branching and spreading like lightning through glass. His wrist joint, a complex arrangement of interlocking geometric structures, simply gave up and shattered into 17 distinct pieces. The sound that came from Thexilor was not a scream. The Vrin didn't have vocal cords as such. It was more like the noise you'd get if you recorded breaking glass and played it backward through a synthesizer programmed by someone having a nervous breakdown. Z's eyes went wide. She released immediately, hands up in the universal gesture of, I didn't mean to do that. Oh crap, she said, with genuine horror. I barely squeezed. This was technically true. Analysis of the security footage would later show she'd applied approximately 8% of her maximum grip strength for roughly 0.7 seconds. The university's human physiology consultant would later note that this was roughly equivalent to her picking up a coffee cup carefully so as not to crush it. Thexelor's arm was now bent at 3 angles that geometry said were illegal. Crystalline fragments scattered across the desk like very expensive confetti. His prismatic blood, a silicon-based compound that looked like liquid opal, was leaking from multiple fracture points. His entire body had gone dim, the Vrin equivalent of shock. "Medical emergency, classroom 7, Professor Kilmathrine was saying into his comm, his voice having achieved a pitch previously unknown to science. Multiple fractures, complete joint destruction, possible systemic lattice compromise. Yes, it was a human. Yes, again. No, she wasn't even trying. Just send everyone." The medical team arrived in 45 seconds, which was impressive considering they'd been on the other side of campus. Then again, the university had invested in rapid response systems after the third human-related incident. They swarmed around Thexelor with practiced efficiency, deploying containment fields to prevent further fragmentation, injecting stabilizing compounds into his crystalline structure, and loading him onto a specialized medical transport that could handle silicon-based life forms. "I'm so sorry," Z was saying, hovering nearby in a way that made the medical team nervous. "I didn't think I knew you guys were different, but I thought." "Please step back, Miss Carter," the lead medic said, not unkindly. They were a centurion like the professor, and their skin had gone the color of resigned acceptance. "We need to get him to surgery immediately. His structure is destabilizing." "Is he going to be okay?" Z asked, and she genuinely sounded concerned. "Probably," the medic said, guiding the transport toward the door. "We've gotten quite good at treating human-related injuries. This is the 7th incident this semester." They whisked Thexelor away, his dim form still making that terrible glass-breaking sound. The remaining students, all 5 of them, stared at Z, with expressions ranging from horrified to "I told you so." Professor Kilmathrine emerged from behind his desk, his skin cycling through colors that probably indicated he was updating his resume. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "please remain after class. We need to file an incident report." Again, the story of what happened spread through campus faster than light, which was saying something at a university that had cracked FTL travel. By the time Z made it to her next class, everyone knew. The footage had gone viral across the student network, watched and rewatched with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. The comments were predictable. "Why would you challenge a human to physical anything? This is what happens when you skip orientation. Play stupid games. Win stupid prizes and a 3-month hospital stay." That's the most gentle she could be, and she still destroyed him. "I'm transferring." In the medical bay, Thexelor lay in a reconstruction chamber, his body wrapped in stabilizing fields, while surgical drones carefully pieced his shattered lattice structure back together. The surgery would take 6 hours and require the importation of specialized crystalline compounds from his homeworld. The doctors estimated he'd need another 8 weeks of regeneration time, followed by extensive physical therapy. His parents had already been notified. His father, a senator in the 4th Assembly, was apparently demanding an investigation into campus safety and the immediate expulsion of all humans. His mother, more pragmatically, had asked if her son had done something phenomenally stupid. The answer was yes. The dean's office had pulled the security footage 3 times, analyzing it from every angle. The conclusion was unavoidable. Miss Carter had accepted a challenge issued by another student, applied minimal force, and caused damage completely unintentionally. Thexelor had initiated the confrontation, ignored warnings from faculty, and essentially injured himself through his own arrogance. "Do we have grounds for disciplinary action?" Dean Marlixven asked, watching the footage again. "Against whom?" her assistant replied. The human followed standard challenge protocols, showed restraint, and stopped immediately when damage occurred. If anything, she demonstrated remarkable control. Thexelor is the one who violated harassment policies and ignored direct orders from faculty. So we're not punishing the human who put a student in surgery. We're not punishing the human who was challenged by a student too arrogant to understand basic physics. If we punish her, we set a precedent that humans are responsible for other species' inability to accurately assess threat levels. Dean Marlix Venn sighed. Add another mandatory seminar. Deathworld species. Do not engage physically. Make it required for all incoming students. And send a memo to faculty. Any student who challenges a human to physical competition will be considered to have accepted full responsibility for consequences. 3 weeks later, Thexilor returned to class. His arm had been reconstructed with reinforced crystalline matrices that were stronger than his original structure, but left visible fault lines that would never fully disappear. He walked with a slight irregularity in his gait, a permanent reminder that pride and physics made poor companions. The classroom went silent when he entered. Z looked up from her notes, her face brightening. "Hey, you're back. How are you feeling?" Thexilor's crystalline structure pulsed with what might have been fear. "Fine," he said quietly, moving to a seat in the back row. "I brought you something," Z said, pulling out a package. "It's a traditional human sorry I broke you gift basket. There's chocolate, which I guess you can't eat, and a book on comparative evolutionary biology, and one of those stress balls. But I tested it first, and it exploded, so maybe don't squeeze it too hard. And, thank you," Thexilor said quickly, taking the basket and retreating to his seat with all possible speed. Professor Kilmathrine began the lecture, his skin a cautious neutral blue. The university had implemented new seating arrangements. Humans had to maintain a minimum 3-meter distance from any species classified as structurally fragile. Signs had been posted throughout campus. "Please do not challenge humans to physical contests." The insurance premiums had gone up again. Z took notes enthusiastically, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her complete understanding of quantum mechanics and her complete ignorance of her own terrifying nature. Thexilor sat in the back, quiet for once, his reconstructed arm a permanent monument to the galaxy's most important lesson about humanity. They weren't trying to be scary. They weren't trying to be superior. They'd just evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them for millions of years, and they'd won that fight so thoroughly that they'd forgotten what it meant to be prey. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, that humans were the friendliest apex predators you'd ever meet right up until the moment you made them prove it. And once you made them prove it, the only thing you could really hope for was that they'd feel bad about it afterward and bring you a gift basket. Thexilor looked at his arm, at the visible fault lines that would mark him for life, and then at the human who'd put them there while barely trying. She was currently explaining something to Yisthen, gesturing with those terrifying hands, completely oblivious to the fact that half the class was still afraid of her. The incident had been named the crystalline fracture event in official reports, and had spawned an entire new branch of university policy. There were seminars now, mandatory orientations, warning signs, and a dedicated medical team trained specifically in treating injuries caused by human interaction. And through it all, humans remained confused about why everyone treated them like natural disasters that had learned to smile and say please. Thexilor opened his gift basket carefully, mindful of his reconstructed arm. Inside, among the items Z had listed, was a note written in surprisingly neat handwriting. "Sorry again about your arm. Let me know if you need help with any assignments while you're catching up. Also, I promise I'll be more careful. I forget sometimes that not everyone is built like us. Friends?" He looked at that note for a long moment, at the casual offer of friendship from a creature that had nearly killed him by accident, and realized something. The rest of the galaxy was still learning. Humans weren't the problem. Human capacity for violence wasn't the problem. The problem was that humans genuinely, honestly, truly wanted to be friends, and had absolutely no concept of how terrifying that proposition was for everyone else. In the end, Thexilor learned his lesson. He never challenged another human, helped establish the Human Interaction Safety Committee, and graduated with honors. The scar on his arm became something of a conversation piece, a physical reminder that in the vast and varied galaxy, some species had earned their place at the top of the food chain, and the wisest thing you could do was acknowledge that fact before testing it empirically. As for Z. Carter, she continued to excel in her studies, made friends across multiple species, and remained